Pam and Ernie Butcher. They very kindly agreed to chat to the parish council about their memories of VE Day, and particularly Pam, because I believe during the war, Pam, you were a young girl growing up in Tarporley and your father was headmaster of the primary school. Is that right?
That's correct. He was also the Secretary of the British Legion, and he was Secretary to the War Memorial Hospital as well.
So a busy man.
Yes, yeah. A busy man.
And what was it like going to school in Tarporley in the war, particularly as your dad was the headmaster?
Well, before the war, when I first started there, I was put in the corner one day for being naughty. And I begged, please God, don't let my dad come in. And he did. So God wasn't listening to me that day. But when the war broke out, we had a lot of evacuees from Liverpool, and which were all housed in the village. And because of that, because one whole school came from Liverpool, we had, it was very, very squashy, you know. We were 3 to a seat instead of 2. And half a day, it got so that they couldn't cope. So we would go to school 1 week in the morning, the next week in the afternoon, and vice versa. And the evacuees would go alternate to us, you see. And he, if it was nice, then we had to go on nature walks if we were off in the afternoon. So that was different. But it didn't last very long because so many of the children were homesick that they started filtering back. And it was quite strange, really, because some of them stayed and some of them didn't, and those who did stay stayed throughout the whole of the war. So that was good. And then when I was 10, I went to the convent in Chester, and of course that meant travelling on the buses, which were always packed, and you were terrified if you missed a bus. So and in the winter it was dark coming home. So not pleasant years at all, really, but we got through it.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioning the school and them going morning and afternoon, because that's some of the advice that we might be doing with our own schools. And
Yes, because of the distance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And do you keep in touch with any of the children that were evacuated here in the war? Do you know what happened to any of them?
Well, some of them stayed in the village and married in the village, and but as for keeping in touch, no, I did to start with, but it tailed off as things do.
And what's your strongest memory of the war? Is there anything that really sticks out of anything that happened during those 4 years that would never happen again, or something that's in your memory?
I think the first thing was when the British soldiers, there was a battalion of British soldiers brought to the village, and they were housed in the Jubilee buildings in the village. And then the Yanks came, the Americans, they came, and they were housed in a lovely house down Bomere Road. And I think the officers were housed in the Perth Hotel, as it was then. And then, of course, we had the Italian prisoners of war. And so a picture that stays in my mind comes back. The Italian prisoners were marched through the village every day, and they were put to work on the farms, which were lower down. And then about 4-5 o'clock in the evening, they were marched back again. And there was never any trouble at all with them. They were quite friendly. They would wave to you, and the Americans were full of themselves, as Americans are, you know. Yeah. But the villagers were urged to be friendly with them. And I can remember the first Christmas they were there, I think we had 3 Americans in our house at Christmas, which was pretty meagre, really, because we were on such tight rations, but still, we got through. And we did keep in touch with one family, and they were very good. They sent us clothes and even food. And that lasted quite some time. I think one of them was sweet on my sister. But it didn't come to anything. So, yes, that was the war. And the one night that sticks in my mind is when we had our little blitz and the planes were coming over and dropping incendiary bombs, and they came right the way down the middle of the street. There were no casualties, but all the windows were blown, and so there was glass everywhere. And that was really not a very nice experience at all. And then there were 2 bombs that were on the road from Tarporley to Eton, and they didn't explode. So that road was closed for about several years until they decided to dig them up. And I don't know what happened. I think there was a bomb disposal squad came, which was but that was way after the war. And then it was strange, really, because the war years were really dark and dreary. And Dad being Dad, he'd been in the First World War, and we had to listen to every news broadcast that there was, and we mustn't talk. But he was a very strict man, but very. The few people that still remember him in the village just always speak very well of him.
So very highly respected.
Very,
Yeah.
yes. So it was. I wouldn't like to live through it again, not with the war as it is today.
Yeah.
No.
When did you first know that the war was coming to an end? How did you feel when victory in Europe was announced? Can you remember?
Well, I sort of sensed it was coming because Dad was also in the Home Guard, and there were a lot of phone calls going on and little snippets of conversation that you picked up that you weren't supposed to. So when it actually happened, there was great elation, great excitement, and everybody seemed to congregate in front of the Swan Hotel.
Right.
That's always been the focal point in the village.
Yeah.
And there was singing, there was dancing, there was flag waving, there was the band playing, and it was just lovely, everybody just let their hair down. And then when it started to go dusk, everybody put their lights on and pulled their curtains back so that we had the lights, so the lights weren't only going on in London. It was, it was a big relief to know that it was over. But then, of course, after the war, it was dark days.
Yeah.
And it was, we got married in 1954, didn't we?
Yes.
And we were still on ration books.
Right. So although there was obviously the initial relief.
Oh, yes,
over,
yes.
there's
Things
still a
were
long
still
journey.
austere.
Yeah.
Mm.
And the first VE Day on the 8th of May 1945 in Tarporley, how did the village celebrate?
Well, it was more afterwards. As I say, everybody congregated in the middle of the village by the Swan, and singing, dancing, flag waving, all that, what they did. And I remember thinking, oh, what a crush, what a crush. Yeah. And I still don't like crowds, do I? But one had to join in. And I do remember I had a very dear friend, Margaret. She's not with us now. And they had a shop, a double-fronted shop, as it is now in the village, one side's our hairdressers and the other side is empty again. And had a flat roof. And they lived above the shop because it was their shop. And they lived above the shop. And we were allowed to climb out of the window and stand on this roof because we were both fed up with the crushing and the pushing and the shoving, you know. And Mum and Dad allowed us to do that. And the times that comes back into my mind when I go to the village and I think, oh yeah, I stood on there. So that was really the highlight of VE Day, first VE Day for me. After that came the street parties and things like that, you know. So.
And Ernie, I believe, although not born in Tarporley, not very far away in Tattenhall, so what was your memory of hearing that victory in Europe?
Well, obviously, very pleased about it. We'd had troops billeted during the war, both as in Tarporley. We'd had a regiment of artillery, two or three regiments of them, and then the Americans came, etc. So we were very militarised, if you like, as lads. We used to go to the top of the village and change guard when they did, and we were just as good at it as the soldiers were. So when VE Day came, we were obviously very pleased because several of people we'd known in the village had to go in the forces and had not come back again, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So great sighs of relief, etc.
Yes.
And obviously jollification's the same as in Tarporley here.
And you got your house back.
And we got our house back, yes.
They had 28 troops billeted on them in their house.
Yes. So that's a lot to cope with.
Your mum didn't have to feed them,
No,
did she?
no. They just had they slept on palliasses, which is a straw mattress actually on the floors. They didn't have beds. They all they did was sleep there really. And we got very friendly with some of them, and Mum corresponded with them during the war. One regiment particularly went out to North Africa, and a lot of them were taken prisoner at Benghazi. And she carried on writing to them when they were prisoners of war in Germany. And we carried on after the war, actually, to one particular family. So obviously a great relief when we knew that Charlie Hellock, his name was, he was going to come back. Yes.
You were very friendly with them.
Yes.
And so how will you two be marking VE Day? Will you be coming out on the doorstep for a toast or standing in front of the television? Have you got any plans at all for Friday?
We're very friendly with our neighbours, and we'll stand on the lawn and they'll stand on their path, and we'll do that. But we'll drink a toast.
Yes.
But,
Well, thank you both so much for sharing those memories with us. That's really, really valuable. I think our Tarporley residents will really enjoy hearing.
well, I hope so. I hope I've got everything right, because I'm sure there are one or two people a little older than I am who perhaps know better.